Hey Andy, how you doing?
Oh, great. How you doing, Nick?
Awesome. I'm really good. I'm like so glad that we got to carve this time out and to talk about what's been going on with DeepSeek. This is such a fast moving kind of development, in the industry. So it's like, even like when we were just talking was like last week. We were talking about kind of the keynote for the springtime. And I think things have probably even changed even since then. But I think I
Sure.
think that was kind of the impetus for us to get together, right? Is to really just to see. I think the implications of DeepSeek. There's lots of different implications, but the one that I think we started to really focus in on is it proving an open source model, and also lowering the barrier of entry for AI to be consumed within large enterprises, and what does that start to look like? But there's a bunch of other things that happened since then. But why don't we start there?
Sure. So I think with every iteration of improvement in AI from at least the 90s, early 90s onwards, there's been two factors associated with that improvement. The first one has been improvement in hardware, and the second is improvement in software. So
Hmm.
speed of execution obviously has improved many orders of magnitude. I mean, we've had Moore's law, we've had GPUs, we've had complete changes in hardware architecture, all of which have allowed the LLM model itself to emerge as a credible and fast enough model to be able to answer questions in near real time. So it was always going to be the case that figuring out a way to optimize the both model training and the model use was going to be significant in terms of outcome, similar to removing pages of zeros in the old days that you didn't really need to calculate, but with them it made your storage massively
Hmm.
inefficient. So I kind of think about this the same way. You want the matrix to be as dense as possible, and not sparse with information. And you want the lookup
Yeah.
time or seek time of that data to be as quick as possible too. So I think the thing that's truly changed is people's ability to run this stuff themselves. I was talking to Phil T, who's a good friend of both of ours, about this, and he literally downloaded the model, got it running on his MacBook Pro, and was getting answers in 30 seconds or less from DeepSeek, and things that took Llama a day to answer. So I think it is
Yeah.
significant. I mean, it is a
So that,
breakthrough, and with all such breakthroughs, I think Bill Gates put the personal in personal computer, right? But I think DeepSeek has put the personal in AI. So it isn't just about enterprises or
mm,
SaaS companies doing this. Individuals can download this technology and start to play with it, but also individuals can contribute to it through open source as well. So I think that's a pretty
yeah.
powerful tool. I think it set the cat amongst the
Yeah.
pigeons. I think the whole open AI discussion going on today, between Elon and Peter Thiel and these other folks, has been spawned from the need and the urgency that has been created by DeepSeek. And then you've got also companies like Alibaba, who are doing things now that are, I think, equivalent to DeepSeek,
Mm.
and really had lost a little bit of their luster over the last few years, that are suddenly looking very appealing again. I saw David Sachs is buying those today. So
Yeah.
I feel like in any space race, what you want to have is as many competitors as possible, because what you end up with then is the best outcome for everybody, but of course not the best outcome for
Yeah.
anybody. And this is the situation we're in. I don't think we know exactly who's going to win at this point, but having multiple participants on the software side and multiple ways of interacting with the models is giving people a lot of choice. And you
Yeah.
think about blockchain like 6 years ago, or any technology hype cycle. At the peak of inflated expectations, everybody looks like a winner, and 2 years later,
Mm.
there are four winners, and that's the way the world works, at
Yeah.
least in my lifetime anyway. So I anticipate that the extremely high valuations that have been achieved by companies whose revenue doesn't match their valuation expectation yet, are suspect, and are vulnerable actually as well. And the
Yeah.
thing about debt, which I always worry about when you're funding build out of anything, if you go back to kind of the Exodus movement and the dot com 1.0 scars and experience. Exodus, I think, split 6 times in 2 years and then went bankrupt. And, you had this kind of expectation that if you carried on buying fiber and data centers, people would fill it up with stuff. And it was true, but
Yeah,
it took another 25 years. And like many models
it
in,
did.
in .com 1.0, HelloFresh is obviously a complete rip of Webvan, for example. But you see
Yeah,
many of the ideas created 98, 99, 2000 are now credible. And I had a
yeah,
boss at Merrill that once said to me, "You can have a great idea, but if you don't have any liquidity, you don't make any money." And he was talking about
mm,
equities at the time, but it's actually true of everything. Like Amazon has to
of
have enough
anything.
liquidity at the edge of the network to be able to deliver things in 2 hours. So it's a supply chain problem.
Yeah,
So does Walmart. And so
yeah,
you start thinking about
yeah,
that in the context of AI. And now I think you step back and go, wow, data is the biggest moat. It's like such a big moat. But now you can take any of
yeah,
these techniques and play with them and try them out on your data. So I really like the look of companies with a lot of proprietary data in this era that we're moving into this year. And I think if you look at where
yeah,
real value is going to come from and profitability for that matter, I think the companies with real data. So in financial services, it's companies like London Stock Exchange, it's companies like S&P, companies like Moody's. These companies that have real data moats, companies like Bloomberg, actually.
mm,
So that's where I
yeah,
think the applications are going to be built, leveraging that data to start to create insights that no one had before. So that's kind of the way
yeah.
I feel about the
That
market, and
makes
that's what makes me excited and enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. If you have data gravity, especially that data is like um, pertinent to like a
Valuable.
really large population or a major industry sector, then you're in a great place. But I think there's also another potential here, and that is like if you're like if you're healthcare, like if you're Pfizer, or if you're Cigna, you're United Health, you have all of this customer data and all this transactional data. That's part of your corporation, and all those are locked away in all these different silos. I thought what DeepSeek also offered was a way to do maybe training much more efficiently and
Mm.
less costly than we've been thinking about, so that can now corporations, and the biggest difficulty with many large corporations that they didn't want to use the public AI models because of the security vector and
Mm-hmm.
the blast radius that could potentially come back at them. So now can they all create their own private whether that's an LLM model or whether that data can now get fed into various different agents that they may be starting to like build and build out. So I think it's almost like these little boomlets that I'm kind of looking at. Is that really what DeepSeek has offered? And maybe it's not just DeepSeek, but maybe it's like Lambda is another great example. It's like you got Meta that is has another open source model. It's I would guess it would be more trusted, even though DeepSeek you can run DeepSeek like on a laptop without connecting to the internet. There are American versions of it that are not tied back to China, as far as we know. So I think that model is really interesting. But I'll tell you the thing that's kind of maybe it is confusing me is the amount of spend that is actually still going up. So we had like I think since we talked last, Andy, it's like EU $200 billion, being allocated for their AI infrastructure to try to catch up with the US and
Mm-hmm.
China. And then we have, if you add Microsoft and Amazon and Google
It's
and
half a
um,
trillion
and
dollars.
Meta, that's like another yeah, it's another 250 billion, right there. So 315 billion. So like, just between kind of the US markets and the European markets, we're looking at like another $500 billion spend this year
Mm-hmm.
alone. So there's a part of me that says the DeepSeek stuff didn't, it spooked the market for a little bit. Like Nvidia recovered probably half of what they lost. I think Arista, if you look at another kind of Arista did a really great job in pivoting towards AI. They were trading at what, like 130, before. I think that was around it. They're trading at 120 now. So it's like, so there has been a recovery and the spending is still going on. So I don't know. What do you think? It's like are we just seeing, hey, there's like lots of different use cases, out there, and they're all now kind of viable use cases, and the large players in this marketplace are investing, for made to win. Try not to spend everyone, and create the best models that they possibly can.
So I think I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the democratization of access to AI is a net
Mm-hmm.
positive for DeepSeek, and is also a net positive for Nvidia and other chip manufacturing companies as well. It's probably also a net positive for all of the other models that can actually compete on a price performance basis with DeepSeek. So if
Mm.
you believe that all of the real value comes from solving business problems better and faster and cheaper than you can currently solve them with current techniques, then you've certainly opened up a lot more of the market. And this is where Satya Nadella's feedback on the Jevons paradox is so important. So for people who don't know what the Jevons paradox is, it essentially means that if you commoditize something and make the price of it cheaper or even free in some cases, that the adoption speed will increase faster than the opportunity cost of buying, in this case, the hardware. Now, the danger of that,
Mm.
going back to my .com 1.0 scenario from earlier, is that you
Yeah.
overbuy, and if you're Global Crossing, you end up selling at cents on the dollar. Now, you look at who bought Global
Right.
Crossing's business, which is a carve out from Temasek, and they've been able to sit on that fiber, some of the best data centers in Asia, in places like Guam, mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, and over the last 20 years, because they bought it at cents on the dollar, have built a fantastic business with a good moat, which houses many of the SaaS companies from the US's Asia implementations. So I think
Mm.
the companies that have borrowed money and debt to basically buy Nvidia gear to build platforms, you have to look carefully at the
Yeah.
business models for those companies, because this
Yeah.
debt works great as long as the tenants keep paying. If the tenants
Yeah.
don't pay, debt is the death of your company, and
Yeah.
debt kills companies. Every company that I've worked in that has filed Chapter 7, Chapter 11, filed
Yeah.
after taking debt that they couldn't pay back. And so,
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
debt. There's nothing wrong with using debt. But when you see debt used at the scale that startups are using a debt, you should at least be scratching your head and at least remember the scars from .com 1.0 and say, well, some of these guys are
Yeah.
not going to survive. And so, again, you have to be sanguine about that. But the positive side of this is that the winners that will emerge on the infrastructure side are going to be supporting use cases that are things that people have only ever dreamed of. And one of my favorite analogies is we work with this lady who actually ran an AI platform company. She was the head of sales, and she was president of the business. And she decided to step
Mm.
back, and instead of trying to sell the platforms, teach people in companies how to use AI. So she's got this 1 week program where she takes an executive team in, teaches the executive team
Mm.
ChatGPT for 2 days, has them bring in on the third day business problems they can't solve, where they've got the data but they haven't solved the problem yet. And then they actually work on building
Uh,
solutions using ChatGPT. And part of the point
mm.
of that is to educate people on the art of the possible. When Steve Jobs went back to Apple, and he was like, I want the platforms to be more, everyone knows what he said, but I won't say it
Mm.
here. And I want them to look better, feel better. I want them to feel good in people's hands. And he took something that was an MP3 player and turned it into something that was massively addictive by just packaging it better. And I think for
Yeah.
many
Mm.
people who are looking at AI, reading about AI, putting pressure on their CIOs and CTOs to adopt more AI, giving them hands-on is it's like giving Play-Doh to a 2-year-old. I mean, you just you watch them and
Mm.
they're like, and so to me, a
They're
lot of the
in.
value here is going to be driven by practitioners, right? This is more like Kaizen than anything else. The people in the middle of the business, the people that understand how the processes work, these are the people that can add the most value using AI, but you have to get them comfortable.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is if they think they're going to lose their jobs, they're often not comfortable in giving ideas for how to use AI. So you've got this exact paradox that we had in 98 to 2001 happening again. And I
Yeah.
think the companies that are bold and courageous and tell people, if you eliminate your own job, we're going to find a job for you somewhere else, make it advantageous
Yeah.
to do that kind of thing. And what happens then is you see innovation come out of people's ears. I mean, it's like an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, well, it really is interesting because, like, I keep on going back to, like, kind of .com one, as you keep on, talking about, it, and you're right, like, it's like not no one knew what to do with the web, like obviously a lot of researchers and, folks who are more technical knew what to do with it, but it took a while for businesses to kind of get up to speed, on what they actually could do, and maybe that's really where
People
we are
forget,
right
Nick,
now.
that the project to join Janet and ARPANET was in 1992. I was at BT then, and
Hmm.
literally day one, I was like, "Hey, this is pretty cool," but it wasn't that cool. I mean, you could use Go for an FTP, and it kind of worked, but it
Yeah,
was the creation of the World Wide Web that changed the content experience significantly. But the creation of
yeah,
Netscape Commerce Server, where now you can transact, that changed everything, and it changed Microsoft's kind of
mm,
go to take over essentially that capability. And I think this time around there are a lot more players than there were then. I mean, really, there was Netscape and Microsoft in '97, right? And so, as someone who was
yeah,
coding websites back then and building content, who suddenly figured out, hey, you can do transactions on this thing too, which is both scary and good at the same time, right?
mm,
You kind of, I think, if you've lived through that, what you know is that um, the democratization itself, which this time, by the way, is not just programmers. It's like anybody can be democratized and taught how to
mm,
use prompts in ChatGPT or any
yeah,
equivalent product. So the democratization is the entire population of the earth that has access to a prompt, basically. And so
yeah,
that allows ideas to be
mm,
turned into projects. I mean, I was reading an article this morning on X about, the fact that you can literally prompt your way from an idea to a fully functional SaaS platform without writing a line of code. I mean, it's literally that
I
good.
know.
Now, I don't know how good those applications are because I haven't done it myself,
Mm,
but I think where we're headed clearly is 2 or 3 years time. The most creative ideas that are the most addictive are going to win in
mm,
whatever sphere you care to think about. So I think if you think about a
yeah,
2025 to 30 being the era, much like 93 to 98 in .com 1.0,
yeah,
I think the difference this time is that the speed of adoption will be faster because individual
yeah,
people can adopt. You don't have to be a programmer, but people with some technical nous are going to do a lot better. And you know what they say: your job won't be replaced by AI. You'll be replaced by a person who knows AI better than you do. I think that's already playing
yeah.
out. To be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so with you on that. And I think you're right. That time frame really makes a lot of sense. 93 to 98, and 25 to, like, 30, as well. And we'll see kind of that compress, down just because, we're just like so much more plugged into using computing,
Well,
than we were back before,
if you think about digital natives, digital adapters, and I don't know what you call the digital avoiders these days. But even like people in our parents' generation now are adapted to digital, right? They were
Right.
previously naive or actually repelled by digital, but in order to communicate with
Yeah.
their grandchildren, they had to get on. And like in the old days, they got onto MySpace and Facebook, and now they're on, Snapchat and TikTok and all the rest.
Mm.
So I think it's back to
Andy,
my
your
liquidity
parents must have
point.
had you when you were like 4 years old or something, they must have had you
Well,
when they were so
the trick
young,
the trick is never getting old is to stay current, I think. But anyway, I mean, I have grandchildren who are 2, 3, and 9, and the 3-year-old and the 2-year-old know how to use FaceTime. That tells you
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah,
So yeah, my I can't remember who had this saying, but I like the saying. It's like technology isn't technology if it existed when you were growing up, and so a
mm,
fridge
mm,
was technology to our parents. So were dishwashers. I mean,
yeah,
even
yeah,
even a washing machine where you didn't have to wring the washing out yourself. I mean, these were
yeah,
like big productivity improvements for our mother's generation, or my mother's generation anyway. And
yeah,
so I think we're going to see people grow up with this technology. I mean, like watching my youngest at Penn State. I mean, they use AI and they don't even. It's just technology. It's just like, and
yeah,
it's just yeah. Well, our computer knows how to listen to the lecturer in class and summarize all the notes at the end of the class. So what's the point in writing them down? And the answer, of course, is if you don't write them down, you don't remember them. But I mean,
You don't
it's like
learn them. Yeah,
it's a lot harder model for parents to participate in, actually.
yeah. No, I get that. But I'll tell you, the one thing that I'm still there's going to be a lot of implications, and we thought like, and maybe this still is true. Like we're going back to DeepSeek, is that we're kind of in an unhealthy state in this AI ecosystem, right? Because we have one company that has kind of dominance on the hardware side of things. They're vertically integrated. They do a super great job. You know, it's not to like knock Nvidia, but it's not healthy. You know, it's not healthy to have one company that has so much, dominance in the space. And I thought with DeepSeek, okay, they kind of wrote their own kind of operating system. They were using, even though it's basically been shown that they've been using Nvidia gear. Like I think they had access to about 50,000 H100s.
I don't think
So
they've actually
not
confirmed that.
Blackwells.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. There's been kind of speculation because like the hedge fund manager or the guy who owns a hedge fund, had that or had that infrastructure, and that's what they
Hmm.
were using. Is what's been reported, but like you're right, who knows if that's actually accurate.
Yeah.
So I think so. The only thing I'm thinking of is that I think for this marketplace to be truly robust, um, it has to be much more innovation, from the point of view of suppliers,
Let's keep going with the analogy for 1 second. So if you think about
yeah,
what happened in the same period that the internet was emerging, where essentially
yeah,
we'd already moved from VAX VMS to Unix on the server side,
hmm,
and a lot of people had
yeah,
started to move to Windows NT. I ran the very early Windows NT trading floor project in 1994. Right, most other people were moving to
hmm,
Sonos and Lotus 123. At Parabar Capital Markets, we moved to Windows NT and XL, which gave us a massive advantage in the market. Now, in that era, Intel was the Nvidia and Microsoft was the OS, right? And
yeah,
even if you were Netscape, you still had to run on Microsoft, right? So you had competing products, much like OpenShift and CUDA right now as well.
yeah,
So the way I think about Linux is that you didn't need to change the hardware platform. You could stick with the same hardware, but now you could run an open source OS. And if you think about
yeah,
DeepSeek and Llama in that context, then all of a sudden,
hmm,
hey, it looks very similar to the Unix versus NT wars, and if you like, the open source OS Linux versus the proprietary OS Microsoft. And it would be hard to say that Linux didn't win on the server side under Ballmer's reign, in my opinion. And even if you look on
hmm,
Azure now, I think something like 85% or more of the server OS running on Azure is Ubuntu Linux of some kind or other, right? So I
So are you
do
basically
believe
saying then?
that we'll
No, go
see
ahead.
not just the democratization of access to OpenAI, but we're also going to see democratization of the stack as well. And so
Mm, I
proprietary
hope so.
wins until such point as open can compete. And that's exactly what
Yeah.
happened between Windows and Linux. And I think the same thing will happen here. And actually, even in the private blockchain space, where I'm on the board of Digital Asset, and we have built this platform now that we've open sourced through the Linux Foundation. I think this is what our clients ask for. This is what the banks want. They want
Mm.
open and free enterprise, and I think that that will win ultimately. And actually, right now, I happen to know that on Wall Street in particular, signing up to software without having any recompense in terms of liability or indemnification is definitely an issue that banks do not want to repeat. Other companies from
Hmm.
Silicon Valley have tried to do that before, and that failed in the early 2000s. So I expect it will fail
Yeah.
again. And companies that are well positioned, who understand the enterprise buyer, are in a very, very strong position. Somewhat
I
ironically,
think so.
actually,
Yeah.
Microsoft, I think, when Red Hat emerged, they were not very good at doing that, but they got better over time. I mean, Alex Pinchev and Matt and those guys basically figured that out.
Yeah.
And I think Microsoft kind of didn't figure it out, or did figure it out, then kind of forgot it for a while in the 2000s to 2012s probably, and now have actually got it back in spades in the cloud world. So I think
For sure. Yeah.
being easy to do business with and figuring out ways that the customer wants to do business with you turns out to be super important. And the fact you can just download DeepSeek onto a PC and start using it I think is a big deal.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like you're that where Phil was able to kind of run DeepSeek on a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of says it all. But I think also what you're saying, I know we're going to have to go in a sec, but the open source models um, have their own stacks in them, and so I think you're saying that there's an abstraction for the hardware. So on the learning side, they seem to be kind of tied into Nvidia, but on the inference side, not so much. So I
Hmm.
think that's, and so the more that gets opened up and the more that there are choices and options there, then I think the greater the democratization and the greater that we'll see companies being able to really leverage that technology. So,
I agree. I mean, again, if you go back to the Intel analogy just for 1 second, I mean, Intel itself didn't sell OSs. They were bound into the Dell,
yeah,
HP, Microsoft, go-to-market channel essentially for them, right? And that's one major
yeah,
difference this time that there's, I mean, it's not that much of a difference because Nvidia is selling through Dell and HP and others as well. But from a software perspective, they are much further up the stack, Nvidia, than Intel was in that era. So I
yeah,
think that's just one
yeah,
area where you want to see competition to drive the best outcome for users and consumers.
yeah. Andy, this was great.
Okay,
Just always a fun conversation, to have with you. So I hope everyone got something out of this. I think it's a different kind of take that's been kind of circulating within basically social and other kinds of forums out there. So thanks for spending the time, Andy.
that's a pleasure. Great to see you again, Nick.
Awesome. So
Cheers.
much.